13 men went into the tunnel. Only one came back. His story will haunt you. He couldn't remember their names, just the screaming. Have you ever felt the kind of fear that makes your bones freeze, a fear so deep, so visceral, that you question the very world around you? Imagine this. 13 men, brave, strong, and resolute, entered an uncharted tunnel, eager to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They were supposed to emerge victorious, their mission complete. But only one man came back. The rest? Gone. Vanished without a trace. What happened to them? Where did they go? This isn't some strange rumor or urban legend. This is a real story. A story of terror so raw it has lingered for decades. A story that defies reason, that calls into question everything we think we know about our world. But let's step back for a moment. Imagine yourself there. You're part of a team, tasked with exploring a tunnel that's been abandoned for years. It's deep, it's dark, and there's something about it that feels wrong. Maybe you'd ignore it, chalk it up to nerves, but that knot in your stomach wouldn't go away. Something wasn't right. The team is diverse, made up of ordinary men from different walks of life, with one goal in mind: to document and explore the mysteries of this tunnel. They've heard the rumors. Some whisper about disappearances. Others talk about strange occurrences, things that make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up just thinking about them. But they brushed it off, right? What could possibly go wrong? When they entered, they didn't know it would be their last time walking into the light of day. They didn't know that this tunnel would become a prison for their souls. What happened inside that tunnel? No one knows for sure. But one man returned, and his story would haunt him, and anyone who heard it, forever. Could you handle it if you were in his shoes? Or would you have cracked under the pressure? Stay with me, because the journey to uncover the truth is only beginning, and trust me, what you're about to hear will send chills down your spine. At first, everything seemed normal. They entered the tunnel with nothing more than a sense of adventure, a handful of flashlights, and the anticipation of what they might find hidden beneath the earth. The air was thick with the musty scent of stale stone, the walls of the tunnel stretching in front of them like the belly of some forgotten beast. As they walked deeper into the darkness, the light from their torches flickered and danced along the uneven walls, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The first sign something wasn't right came almost too quietly to notice. It started with a strange hum, a low, almost imperceptible sound, like the hum of machinery or the buzz of electricity. But there were no wires down there, no machines, just the earth, pressing down on them from all sides. At first, they tried to ignore it. They dismissed it as the sound of their own footsteps or the rustling of air in the cavern. But as they moved further in, the hum grew louder. And then it changed. It became rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. Slowly, steadily, but undeniably there. It wasn't until one of the men, Kevin, a seasoned engineer, suggested they stop and listen that the group began to feel the full weight of what was happening. The others reluctantly agreed. The thumping was unmistakable now, not from any man-made source, not from the natural creaking of rock. Something was alive in the tunnel, something they couldn't see, something watching them. But that wasn't the only thing they heard. In the silence that followed, another sound emerged, one that sent a shiver down their spines. A soft whispering, coming from somewhere deep within the tunnel, too muffled to understand but clear enough to make their blood run cold. "Is anyone else hearing that?" Frank, the youngest of the group, asked, his voice trembling. No one answered. The whispering continued, distant but drawing closer, as though the very walls themselves were alive, shifting and muttering in their language. They checked their equipment. Flashlights, cameras, all of it seemed to be functioning perfectly. There was no logical explanation for the noises. Kevin, always the skeptic, wanted to believe it was just some sort of natural acoustic anomaly. He even joked about it, trying to keep the group's morale high. But the tension was building. Every step they took deeper into the tunnel felt heavier, like the air was becoming denser, harder to breathe. Every turn of the tunnel's winding corridors led them further into the unknown. And then, they found something. It wasn't much at first, just a faded piece of parchment wedged between two rocks on the floor. Frank picked it up, dusting it off carefully. It was a map, old, yellowing, and covered in strange symbols. The edges were frayed, and the paper seemed to pulse with an energy that none of them could understand. What was most unsettling, though, was the location marked on it. The map had no name, no title, just a symbol that none of them could recognize. A series of jagged lines forming a circle, with an X at the center, placed right where they were standing. "What the hell is this?" Kevin asked, studying the map with furrowed brows. "I've never seen anything like it," said Mark, the geologist. "This could be some kind of old survey map, but those symbols? They're not standard at all." The group stood in uncomfortable silence. They couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that this map was a warning, not a guide. But none of them were ready to back out. Not yet. As they gathered their bearings and pressed forward, the whispering intensified, and the hum turned into a steady pulse. The tunnel seemed to be alive, pressing in on them, tightening around their chests. Each step felt heavier than the last. And then, as they rounded a bend, they saw it. At the end of the passage, just ahead in the gloom, a faint glow appeared. It was dim at first, nothing more than a soft, eerie light. But it was growing fast. The group hesitated. What was this light? Where was it coming from? Kevin, as usual, tried to make sense of it. Could be a reflection off something. Maybe another opening ahead. But as they moved closer, they realized it wasn't a reflection. It was something much more strange, much more unsettling. The light wasn't shining from an object or source. It was part of the tunnel itself. The walls shimmered faintly, as if the rock itself was alive, pulsing with an energy none of them could explain. And in the center of that glowing space, faint outlines of figures began to appear. Shadowy shapes, too indistinct to make out clearly. They flickered, shifted, and then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the glow dimmed and vanished, leaving nothing but the cold, unyielding darkness of the tunnel. A silence descended, thick and suffocating. "Did anyone else see that?" Mark whispered, barely able to breathe. They all nodded, though no one wanted to say it aloud. Something was down here with them. Something that shouldn't have been. Something they couldn't explain. The tunnel had just revealed its first secret. James was the one who came back. Of the 13 men who entered that cursed tunnel, he was the only one who survived. But to say he survived would be a gross oversimplification. James had been through something beyond human comprehension, something that twisted his very understanding of reality. When he returned, his eyes were hollow, his face pale, his hands trembling uncontrollably. For days he didn't speak. He didn't even look at anyone, as if he were afraid they might somehow pull him back into the nightmare he had left behind. When he finally opened his mouth, it wasn't to recount the horrors they had all witnessed. It was to beg for silence, for understanding, for peace that would never come. "It's not a place," he said one night, his voice hoarse, like someone who had long since forgotten the comfort of sound. "It's a thing. and it's not alone. The words didn't make sense at first, but those who heard them, who saw the fear in his eyes, knew something terrible had happened. James wasn't just shaken by what he'd seen, he was broken. That night we gathered around him. He wasn't ready to share, not yet, but when he finally did, we understood the price he had paid to return to us. "It started normal enough," James began, his eyes distant, like he was seeing it all over again, a nightmare replaying in his mind. "We thought the light was just an anomaly, something we could explain. But then the walls, the air, it started to change. We thought we were imagining it. That's when we saw the first thing. It wasn't a person, but it looked like one. Too tall, too thin, and it moved wrong. But it wasn't real. It couldn't have been." We sat, listening, the room growing colder by the minute. The look in James's eyes was one none of us would ever forget. "They came from the dark," he continued, his hands twitching. "The whispers, they weren't just sounds. They were commands, orders, like it was speaking to us, but it wasn't. It wasn't a language we knew. It didn't make sense. We didn't understand. And then—" His voice trailed off, a deep, hollow breath escaping his chest, as if he were drowning in the memory. "Then one of them was gone. Frank, he just vanished. 1 second he was there, the next he wasn't. We searched for him. We screamed his name, but there was nothing. Just the echo, just the hum. I could see it then, his face contorting, his eyes flicking nervously to every corner of the room, as if expecting something, someone, to appear from the shadows. We didn't know it, but we were already too deep. That map, it wasn't just a map. It was a warning, a guide to where we shouldn't go, to where the thing was waiting. But we didn't turn back. We pressed on. There was something terrifying about the way James said those last words. It wasn't just fear in his voice. It was guilt. A guilt that weighed on him, that haunted him even in the safety of his home, even in the light of day. The further we went, the worse it got. It wasn't just the dark. It wasn't just the things we were hearing. The tunnel was alive, I swear it. The walls, the ground, everything began to pulse with a heartbeat of its own. And then the light appeared again. But this time it wasn't the same. It was closer, brighter, and it was them. They were in the light. James paused here, and for the first time since he started speaking, he looked at us, really looked at us. "I saw them up close. The shadows, the things. They weren't human, not anymore." We all felt it then. The room felt colder, the weight of his words pressing in on us. James's breathing grew shallow as his hands clenched into fists. "I don't know what happened next," he whispered, his eyes flickering as if trying to avoid the memories. "I remember Frank's screams. Then there was a crash, and suddenly I was running through the dark. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I don't even know how I made it out. But I remember the sound of footsteps. Someone was behind me. Someone was following." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I listened. I felt it too. A growing dread, an unease that tightened my chest. And though the words that followed still echo in my mind, they still don't fully make sense. James's story ended with one last sentence, a sentence that has never left me. We were never meant to go down there, and whatever followed me back, it's still with me. For a long time after he spoke those words, no one moved, no one breathed. We all just sat there, caught between disbelief and terror. Could James be telling the truth? Could all of this really have happened? But as the days passed, we began to see signs. Small things at first, strange noises in the night, fleeting shadows in the corner of our eyes. And then came the dreams. The same dark tunnel. The same creatures, their eyes hollow, their bodies long and twisted. I would lie awake at night, unable to shake the image of them, of that tunnel. And I knew, deep in my bones, that whatever James had faced down there, it wasn't over. As the days passed, the tension around James's story grew. The other members of the group, the ones who hadn't gone into the tunnel, tried to convince themselves it was just a bad experience, some kind of collective trauma. But every conversation about it, every mention of that cursed map, only seemed to stir up more unease. But the really strange things didn't start happening until after that first night James spoke to us. The whispering returned. Soft at first, almost like a breeze passing through the trees, but unmistakable in its cadence. It wasn't a sound that could be easily ignored. It was persistent. The type of whisper that worms its way into your mind, planting seeds of doubt, of dread. At first, we thought it was nothing. The house was old, and the floorboards creaked. The wind howled through the cracks in the windows, casting strange shadows across the walls. But one night, as I sat alone in my room, something changed. I heard it again. Clearer this time. The whispering. But it wasn't coming from outside my window or from the walls of the house. No, this time it came from the darkness itself. It felt as if something was in the room with me, standing just out of sight. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but deep down I knew. The tunnel wasn't just a place anymore. It was reaching out to us. I wasn't the only one who noticed. In the days that followed, the others began to speak of similar experiences. No one was exempt from the growing unease. The house seemed to be filled with strange, subtle signs, flickers of light that lasted just a little too long, objects that weren't where we'd left them. And then there were the sounds. Footsteps, soft and deliberate, pacing through the rooms at night. But it wasn't until one of us went missing that we truly understood the gravity of it all. It was Mark who first disappeared. He'd been distant for a few days, almost like he was withdrawing from the group. At first we thought he was just stressed, trying to process what had happened to Frank and the others. But then, one morning, he was gone. Vanished. His room, untouched. The door locked from the inside. His clothes were still in the closet, and his car sat in the driveway, keys on the table. It was as if he had just evaporated. We searched everywhere, inside the house, outside in the surrounding woods, but there was no sign of him. No tracks in the dirt, no indication of a struggle. It was like he had simply stepped into thin air. That's when we realized that whatever had followed James back from the tunnel wasn't satisfied with just him. It wanted more. And it wasn't going to stop until it had claimed every last one of us. We were terrified, but we couldn't just run. Not after everything we'd already experienced. We had to understand what was happening. What had happened to Mark. And so, we turned back to James, to the one man who knew what the tunnel had done to him. He looked different now. Haggard, with dark circles beneath his eyes. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. He'd barely spoken to anyone since Mark's disappearance, his mind lost in thought, trapped in whatever nightmare was still haunting him. But when we brought up Mark, when we asked him what we should do, he finally spoke. "You don't understand," James said, his voice low and strained. "Whatever it is, it's not just after us. It's after something bigger, something we can't stop." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, his eyes wild. "It's always been here. The tunnel wasn't just some random place. It's a doorway, a passage to something far worse. And we opened it." Those words sank into the pit of my stomach like a stone. The implications of what he was saying were too much to comprehend, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. The tunnel wasn't just an accident. It wasn't just some strange, supernatural anomaly. It was a doorway, a gateway to something far darker. And whatever had passed through that door wasn't finished with us. It was only getting started. That night, we made the decision to go back. It wasn't just a need for answers anymore. It was a desperate attempt to find some kind of closure, to stop whatever this thing was from spreading any further. We had no idea what we were walking into, but we knew we couldn't keep running. Not anymore. As we gathered our equipment, preparing for what we hoped would be our final descent into the abyss, I couldn't help but wonder. What if we were too late? What if the tunnel had already claimed us all, one by one, and there was no way out? The light in the hallway flickered. We all turned toward it. And in that moment, we knew. We were no longer in control. The further we descended into the tunnel, the more it felt as if we were stepping into a world that wasn't meant for human eyes. The walls closed in on us, the air grew thick and heavy, and a sense of dread gnawed at the back of my mind. The quiet hum that had once been faint was now constant, an unsettling reminder that we weren't alone in this place. But it wasn't until we came across the old, rusted metal door that things truly began to unravel. It was hidden in a narrow passage, almost as though the tunnel itself had tried to swallow it. The door, ancient and worn, stood there like a forgotten sentinel, its edges covered in layers of dust and grime. The markings on it were faded, barely discernible, but something about it called to us. A quiet pull that none of us could resist. We hesitated. There was no reason why this door should be here, no reason for it to exist in the middle of a place like this. But the longer we stood there, the more it felt like it was waiting for us. It was as if it had been expecting us to find it all along. James was the first to approach it. His face was pale, his eyes wide, and there was an unmistakable tremor in his hands as he reached for the handle. "Don't open it," Kevin warned, his voice strained. "Whatever this is, it's not what we're supposed to find." But James didn't listen. Slowly, he twisted the rusted handle, and with a creak that sounded like the earth itself groaning in protest, the door opened. The room beyond was small, barely big enough to fit the 6 of us standing shoulder to shoulder. Inside, the walls were covered in yellowing papers, old maps, and files that seemed to have been hastily discarded. But it wasn't the documents that caught my attention. It was the single object sitting in the center of the room, a weathered wooden box, cracked and chipped with age. James was already there, his trembling hands reaching for it. He hesitated for a moment before he opened it, revealing a small, folded parchment. His eyes widened as he pulled it out, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker in his expression. Something almost like recognition. This isn't just some abandoned tunnel," James murmured. "This place, it's connected to something much older, something we've never been taught." I stepped closer, my curiosity piqued. The paper was covered in symbols, some of them strange and incomprehensible, but a few were unmistakable. Ancient sigils, runes I had seen in history books, relics of a time long past. And then there was something else, something I couldn't place at first. At the bottom of the page was a date, 1942. "Wait, 1942? Mark whispered, his voice cracking. That's the year of the military operation in these parts." Suddenly, everything clicked into place. We had heard rumors of secret military experiments during World War II, conducted in remote locations to test weapons and technologies. But no one had ever been able to confirm it. Until now. "This was a military project," Kevin said, the pieces of the puzzle slowly coming together in his mind. "The map, the symbols, the door, it all fits. They were experimenting with something down here, something dangerous." The more we dug through the files, the clearer it became. It was a project designed to harness unknown forces, something beyond the realm of science, Ancient rituals, folklore, and arcane knowledge were mixed in with technical jargon. The military had been trying to tap into something that was never meant to be disturbed. They had opened a door to something old, something that had been buried for a reason. James was shaking now, clutching the parchment tightly in his hands. His face was drained of color as he whispered, "They didn't just find this place, they awakened it." My heart dropped into my stomach as his words sank in. The past wasn't just connected to the tunnel, it had created it. The military's experiments hadn't just been about weapons or technology. They had been about something much darker. They had been trying to manipulate the supernatural, to bend forces they didn't understand. And in doing so, they had unleashed something terrible, something that had been sleeping for centuries, maybe longer. The door to the past had been opened, and it wasn't going to stay closed again. James dropped the parchment onto the ground, his hands trembling violently. "We're not the first ones to be here," he said, his voice barely audible. "There were others before us, people who never came back." The words were like a cold slap to the face. We had thought we were just a group of explorers, stumbling into a forgotten corner of the world. But now we understood. This wasn't an isolated event. This wasn't just about the 13 of us. We were part of a much larger, much darker story. "We need to get out of here," Kevin said, his voice shaking. "Now." But it was too late. The tunnel was already moving, already alive. It had begun to close in on us. The walls shifted with an unnatural groan, and the faint, rhythmic thumping that had started when we entered grew louder, stronger. We weren't just trapped in the tunnel anymore. We were part of it. And whatever had been awakened in the depths of that place wasn't going to let us go. We didn't waste any time after James's chilling revelation. Kevin, always the practical one, urged us to turn back, to leave the cursed tunnel behind before whatever forces were at play could trap us any further. But it was already too late. The air itself had changed. It wasn't the same as when we first entered, not the dry, cold air of an abandoned place, but something heavier, thicker, alive with an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. We turned around, hoping to retrace our steps, to find the way back. But the tunnel had shifted. The walls, which had been familiar moments before, now seemed like a maze of jagged turns, as if the very earth was reshaping itself, throwing us deeper into its grasp. No matter which way we walked, the path ahead always seemed to curve, leading us farther away from the exit. The first real sign of danger came moments later, just as we rounded a sharp corner. Frank, one of the men who had been the most hesitant about the whole expedition, suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. His body tensed, eyes wide as if he had seen something only he could understand. I followed his gaze, heart pounding in my chest, but all I saw was darkness. Nothing moved. Nothing stirred. "Frank?" I called out, but his eyes stayed locked on the shadows ahead, his mouth opening as if to say something, but no sound came out. His face twisted with terror, his breath shallow. Then, like a puppet with its strings cut, he fell to the ground. He didn't scream. He didn't make a sound. He simply collapsed, his body limp, as if all life had drained out of him in an instant. I rushed to him, shaking him, but he didn't respond. His skin was cold, his eyes vacant, staring into the void. Something was deeply wrong. Frank wasn't just unconscious. Something had taken him. Something that had drained the very life from him. "What happened?" Kevin demanded, panic rising in his voice as he knelt beside me. "Is he?" "I don't know," I whispered, my voice trembling. "It's like he's gone." The air around us seemed to hum louder now, as though the very tunnel was reacting to Frank's state, feeding off the fear that was now coursing through us. The faint whispering we had heard before returned, now sharp, like voices speaking in a language we couldn't understand, but that we somehow felt deep in our bones. Suddenly, I heard it. Footsteps. Soft at first, but unmistakable. The sound of something, or someone, moving in the dark. It wasn't Frank. We hadn't made any noise, no movement that would explain what was coming. But the footsteps, slow and deliberate, drew closer with every passing second. There was no time to think. I grabbed Frank's limp body, and we all began to back away, stumbling in our haste. But the tunnel stretched on endlessly, and the footsteps didn't stop. In fact, they grew louder, as if more figures were joining in. I turned around, desperate to see who or what was behind us. There, in the farthest reaches of the tunnel, faintly illuminated by the dim glow of our flashlights, I saw them. Shadows. Figures moving with unnatural speed, their limbs stretching and twisting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. They weren't human, not by any stretch of the imagination. Too tall, too thin, their forms almost ethereal, their faces hidden in the folds of the darkness. And then they spoke. Their voices were low, guttural, and garbled, like a chorus of whispers fighting to be heard over one another. But there was one thing that stood out clearly. Leave. It wasn't a request. It was a command. A demand, spoken in that eerie, otherworldly voice that seemed to come from all around us, echoing off the walls, vibrating through our bones. We ran. There was no time to process what was happening, no time to think. Every instinct in my body screamed that we were being hunted, that we were already too far gone, that the tunnel had claimed us. But we didn't stop. We couldn't. We sprinted down the ever-changing maze, our footsteps echoing like a heartbeat, growing fainter the further we ran. But no matter how fast we went, the shadows were always just behind us, always closer. They knew us. They saw us. I glanced over my shoulder, and in that instant, I saw one of the figures, tall, gaunt, its face a mass of shifting, unrecognizable features. Its eyes, though, were the only things that remained constant. Black, empty, endless. That was when I realized something that chilled me to the core. It wasn't the tunnel that was after us. It was the things inside it. And they weren't going to stop. Not until they had claimed every single one of us. We didn't stop running. Not when we hit the intersection. Not when we stumbled into what we thought was an exit, only to realize it was just another dead end. We ran, and we ran, and we ran. But the darkness followed. We couldn't escape. No matter how fast we ran, no matter how many corners we turned, or how many paths we tried to take, the tunnel never seemed to end. The walls, which had once felt like the solid, unyielding foundation of the earth, now felt like they were closing in on us, compressing the air and making every breath a struggle. The shadows pursued us relentlessly. The footsteps echoed all around us, growing louder with every passing second. The whispers, those low, indecipherable voices, crept into our minds, planting seeds of doubt and fear that grew stronger with every step. We were running. Yes, but for what? To escape? Or was there no escaping what had already begun? It was during one of those desperate, panicked sprints that Kevin finally stopped. We were moving through what looked like an abandoned chamber in the tunnel, its walls covered in strange symbols and markings. Kevin suddenly held up a hand, signaling for us to stop. "We need to stop," he said, his voice ragged with exhaustion. "We need to think." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Think? In the middle of all this? "Think," I repeated, incredulous. "We need to get out of here, Kevin. We need to move, now." But Kevin was shaking his head, his eyes wide with fear, but also with something else, something that made me stop and listen. There was a strange calm in his voice, a calm that didn't belong in this nightmare. "No," Kevin insisted, his hands gripping his flashlight so tightly his knuckles were white. Think about it. None of this makes sense. The way the tunnel changes, the shadows, the whispers, it's like we're inside a loop. It's not just a haunted place. It's something more. Something older. I could see where he was, coming from. We had no answers, no explanation for what we were facing. The longer we ran, the more it felt like we were chasing our own tails, only getting deeper into the labyrinth of horror without any way out. But as desperate as I was to flee, Kevin was right about one thing. We had to understand what was happening to us, or we'd be lost forever. "What are you saying?" I asked, trying to control my panic. "What are we supposed to think? That this is some kind of ghost story? Or some sick experiment gone wrong?" "No," Kevin said. "I think it's bigger than that. I think this is something from the past, something that's been here for a long time. This tunnel, it's not just a place, it's a doorway." A doorway. The word hit me like a physical blow. The thought of it, the realization that we were dealing with something far beyond the ordinary, left me breathless. Could Kevin be right? Had we stumbled onto something ancient, something that had existed long before the military's failed experiments, long before our arrival? "The military," Mark began, his voice shaky. "They were trying to open something, a doorway like you said. But they failed, didn't they? They couldn't control it, and whatever they released is what's hunting us now." There was a brief, heavy silence, and we all exchanged looks. The weight of those words settled over us, the possibility that whatever was hunting us was not some random apparition, not just a curse, but something ancient, something intentional. "Maybe it wasn't an accident," James finally spoke, his voice soft but carrying the weight of all his experiences. He looked haunted, his eyes darkened with the knowledge of things no man should know. "Maybe we were never supposed to come down here. Maybe we weren't supposed to find this place, but we did. And now, whatever's down here is trying to claim us. It's using us to get out." The room was cold now. Cold in a way I couldn't explain. There was a palpable tension in the air, like the tunnel itself was listening to us, waiting for us to figure it out, to realize that we were never meant to leave. "This is exactly what they were trying to do," Kevin said, his voice growing firmer with each passing moment. "The military wasn't just researching ancient symbols. They were trying to open a gate to something older than humanity, something that existed before time as we know it. And when they succeeded in unlocking it, they unleashed a force they couldn't control. "And we're the ones who are going to pay for it," Mark muttered, looking as though the last shreds of hope had been torn away from him. But I couldn't help myself. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell him that we were just dealing with some kind of freak accident. That all of this was just one big misunderstanding, one bad stroke of luck. But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't true. We had opened something we didn't understand. And now, it wanted us. For a long while, no one spoke. We just stood there, in the dark, surrounded by the looming presence of the tunnel. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the shadows seemed to creep closer, moving in ways that didn't make sense. I wanted to escape. I wanted to run, but deep down, I knew that running wouldn't change anything. We were already part of the story now. There was no turning back. Finally, Kevin broke the silence. "We need to make a choice. We can keep running, hoping for an exit we won't find. Or we can confront whatever this is and try to stop it. End it." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone knew what was at stake, but none of us could move, could make a decision. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about understanding the truth, about facing the consequences of our actions. And I knew, without a doubt, that the moment we made that decision, the game would change forever. It wasn't just fear that kept us from moving forward. It was a deeper, more primal instinct. We were at a crossroads, and each path ahead seemed equally lethal. On one hand, there was the terrifying unknown, the creeping darkness of the tunnel that seemed to twist itself into an endless maze. On the other, the strange feeling that whatever force was down here was aware of us now, watching our every move, waiting for us to make the wrong one. But Kevin, in his desperation to make sense of it all, insisted that we press on. "If we don't confront it now, we'll never get out," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "We have to find a way to close this, whatever it is, before it spreads, before it gets worse." The group didn't say much after that. The words, "get worse," hung in the air like an unspoken death sentence. Whatever had started in this tunnel wasn't confined to it. I could feel it, that gnawing sense that whatever had been unleashed wasn't just interested in keeping us trapped here. No, it wanted more. It wanted to spread, and it wasn't going to stop until it had consumed everything. James, pale and gaunt, looked at us with a somber expression. "I think we all know by now," he said quietly, "that the tunnel is alive. It's been alive for a long time. But the question is, what is it, and how do we stop it?" Nobody answered. The truth was too much to bear. We had been thrown into something far darker than we had ever imagined. There was no scientific explanation for what was happening. No folklore that could account for the strange forces we were encountering. Whatever we were dealing with wasn't from this world. We decided to make our way back to the chamber where we had found the map, hoping that the files and documents we had uncovered earlier might hold some sort of clue. With Frank's disappearance still fresh in our minds, and the terror of the shadows chasing us down, we thought that maybe, just maybe, the answers we needed were hidden in those yellowed papers. It wasn't long before we found ourselves back at the chamber. The eerie symbols on the walls greeted us like old friends, their cryptic shapes lingering in the periphery of our minds. Kevin grabbed a flashlight, scanning the room again, his eyes narrowing in concentration. He had been the most adamant about the military connection, but now there was something different in his approach. His usual skepticism was gone. There was no denying it anymore. The supernatural was real. We scattered throughout the chamber, picking up pieces of the puzzle. The documents were frayed and torn, and some of the papers were written in languages none of us recognized. Symbols, runes, handwritten notes that seemed to describe strange rituals and phenomena. But one thing was becoming clear. The military had been meddling with forces they couldn't control. The papers told a story of an ancient ritual, one that dated back long before the war. And at the center of it all was the doorway. The doorway. It was mentioned in almost every document we found. Some papers described it as a rift. Others referred to it as the gate. The gate to what exactly? None of them were brave enough to say outright. But there was one thing they all agreed on. The gate had to be opened. And once it was, it would release something else. Something ancient, something that had been buried for centuries. "Here," Mark called out from across the room, his voice breaking the heavy silence. He was holding an old journal, its cover worn and faded. "This one's different. It's written by one of the original researchers. It says they weren't the first to discover the gate. That's impossible. This is all based on something older than the war." I walked over to Mark, my heart pounding. He passed me the journal, and I flipped through the pages, trying to make sense of the chaotic scribblings inside. The researcher had written of a great awakening. The words were frantic, desperate, and then, at the end of the entry, there was one line that stuck out. "The gate is a doorway not just to another place, but to another time." Another time? The meaning hit me like a slap to the face. What if this wasn't just a door to another world, but a portal through time itself? A rift that had been opened, not just to the horrors of another dimension, but to something else. something from the past or the future. Something that had been watching, waiting to return. Kevin's voice interrupted my thoughts. "Do you see it? The pattern in the documents?" he said, his finger tracing the lines of the journal. "It's not just the military. They were following an old legend, one that predates everything we know, a prophecy. The rift is supposed to open at a specific time, when the conditions are right. The exact conditions that we walked into." I felt a chill run through me. We had become part of the ritual, the specific timing, the alignment of the stars. We were living through it right now. That's when the ground beneath us began to tremble. A low rumble at first, so subtle that we almost didn't notice it. But then the walls seemed to vibrate. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. And then it hit me. There was no escape. We were trapped, not just in the tunnel, but in the timing of it all. Whatever had been unleashed, whatever was waiting to come through the gate, had already begun. And we had only moments left before it fully manifested. It was too late to turn back. Our investigation had gone too far. We had already awoken the forces beyond, and there was no going back. The gate was open. And now, there was no stopping what was coming. The tremors grew more violent. It was as if the very earth was reacting to something being awakened deep beneath the surface. The walls shook, groaning like a living thing, the air thick with an unnatural energy. For a moment, everything felt suffocating, as though the tunnel itself was inhaling, pulling us deeper into its dark embrace. We had no time to think, no time to process the words that had just been spoken. The gate was open, and whatever had been trapped on the other side was coming through. But we couldn't just stand there, paralyzed by fear. We had to act. We had to do something. Kevin grabbed the journal from Mark's hands, flipping through the pages frantically. "There's got to be something we missed," he muttered. "Some clue, some way to shut this thing down before it's too late." His voice barely cut through the sound of the tunnel groaning around us, and the faint whispers that had started to intensify once more. They were clearer now, more insistent. It wasn't just random noise. It was a language, a voice calling to us, beckoning us closer. "Listen," Mark said, his voice shaking. "Do you hear it? They're speaking to us. It's them. They're trying to communicate." The rest of us turned our heads, trying to locate the source of the sound. But it was impossible to pinpoint. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the very walls, from the ceiling, from the ground beneath our feet. It was as though the tunnel itself was alive, a vast, interconnected entity with eyes and ears everywhere. James, who had remained eerily silent up to that point, suddenly spoke, his voice almost a whisper. "We have to face them. We can't run. We never could." There was a weight in his words, something I couldn't ignore. He was right. Running had never been an option. The tunnel had already claimed us. There was no escape. If we wanted any chance at survival, we would have to face whatever was coming. The temperature dropped sharply. My breath fogged in front of me, and I could feel a cold, unnatural wind gusting from behind, pushing us forward. It felt as if something was driving us deeper into the darkness, urging us toward whatever lay ahead. I could feel the other's eyes on me, as if waiting for someone to lead. I couldn't make the decision. But I knew one thing for sure. There was only one way through this. "We move together," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We face whatever's down here, and we do it as a team. We either make it out alive, or we—" My words trailed off, not needing to be finished. We all knew what the alternative was. Kevin, always the strategist, nodded grimly. "We stick together. No one gets left behind. But we have to be careful. If we let the tunnel control us, we're done." And so, with no other choice but to move forward, we pressed on. The tunnel widened, and ahead, faint, flickering light appeared, soft and ghostly, as though it was being emitted from some unseen source. It wasn't natural light. It wasn't like the glow of our flashlights. It was something else, something otherworldly. It pulsed with an eerie rhythm, like a heartbeat. And there, standing in the center of it all, was the figure. Tall, gaunt. Its shape was almost indistinguishable from the darkness itself, an outline of something that shouldn't have existed. At first, I thought it was a shadow, a trick of the light. But as we moved closer, the figure became clearer. A man, or something that had once been a man, stood before us, his eyes hollow and black, his skin stretched tight over a skeletal frame. It was then that I realized. This wasn't the first time someone had been lost in the tunnel. This wasn't the first time someone had been claimed. The figure's mouth opened, and the whispers became clear. "You shouldn't have come." The voice was his. It was the same voice we had heard echoing through the walls of the tunnel, the same voice that had called to us, beckoning us forward. The figure took a step toward us, its limbs jerking and contorting unnaturally with each movement. It wasn't human. It was something far worse. "Leave now, and you may still have a chance. Stay, and you will be trapped forever." We all froze. The terror was palpable, suffocating. It was hard to focus, hard to breathe with the weight of those words pressing down on us. The figure moved again, slowly, deliberately, its head tilted to the side, as if studying us. James stepped forward, his face pale and drawn but resolute. "What are you?" His voice cracked, but there was no turning back now. "What do you want from us?" The figure's lips curled into what could have been a smile, though it was more like a grotesque mockery of one. It was a smile that twisted the very idea of humanity. "We are the ones who were never meant to be free. We are the gatekeepers, and you—" It paused, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. "You are the key." The words sent a cold shiver down my spine. We were the key? To what? What were they trying to do to us? Before anyone could react, the air grew thick with an overwhelming sense of wrongness. The temperature dropped even further, and suddenly the shadows seemed to move, pulling toward the figure, swirling around him like a cloak of darkness. It was as if the very fabric of reality itself was warping around us, folding in on itself. The figure stretched its long, spindly arms toward us, and for the first time since entering the tunnel, I felt true, unrelenting terror. My legs froze. I couldn't move. The others were the same, trapped in place by the dark presence that had consumed everything around us. But in that moment of paralyzing fear, I saw something, a flash of light in the distance, and I knew, deep down, that it was the exit, the only way out, the way we could still escape, if we ran, if we could find the strength. The shadows lunged forward, and that's when everything broke. The air was suffocating. The darkness seemed to thicken, like a living, breathing entity, wrapping around us, tightening, compressing. The figure's outstretched arms reached toward us with unnatural speed, its skeletal fingers curving in a grotesque imitation of a welcoming gesture. But there was nothing welcoming about it. It was a predator, and we were its prey. I tried to move, but my legs refused to obey, as though the very earth beneath my feet had come alive, anchoring me in place. The whispers grew louder, drowning out all other sounds, a cacophony of voices that seemed to be clawing at my mind. It was maddening. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears, faster, faster, like I was running out of time, like time itself was slipping away. James, always the first to act, was the first to snap out of the paralysis. He let out a strangled cry and lunged forward, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. "We have to run," he shouted, his voice raw with panic. And that's when I felt it. The tunnel itself had shifted again, blocking the way we had come. The walls seemed to close in, pushing us toward the center of the chamber, where the figure was waiting, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The path we thought we could escape through had vanished, replaced by endless corridors of darkness. "We're trapped!" Kevin yelled, backing away slowly, his eyes wide with terror. "There's no way out! We're surrounded!" I spun around, desperate, looking for any sign of escape, but it was no use. The walls were closing in, pushing us toward the center of the chamber, where the figure stood, and with it, the shadows. They writhed and contorted, moving with a mind of their own, like they were waiting for us to make our final move. The figure's voice boomed again, impossibly loud. "You are too late! The gate is open! There is no going back now!" The words struck me like a physical blow. The gate, the very thing we had been trying to understand, trying to close, had already been opened. It was beyond us now. There was no way to reverse it. We were caught in the web, tangled in something far older, far more dangerous than any of us could comprehend. Desperation clawed at my throat. We were running out of time. Whatever the figure was, whatever it wanted, it wouldn't let us go. The realization hit me with full force. We weren't just trapped physically, we were trapped in time. This place wasn't just a tunnel, it was a prison. A prison built by forces beyond human understanding. I turned to the others, my heart pounding in my chest. "We need to find a way to close it. The gate. There has to be something we can do." But no one had an answer. The hopelessness in their eyes was palpable. We were fighting an enemy we couldn't see, couldn't understand. The shadows were everywhere now, suffocating the space around us. They were closing in. "We can't keep running," Mark said, his voice barely a whisper. His eyes were glassy, filled with fear. "There's nowhere left to run." His words rang true. The tunnel, once a place of potential escape, had become our tomb. The walls seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, vibrating under our feet. The shadows were drawing closer, swallowing the light, consuming everything in their path. And then, the figure moved. It wasn't slow anymore. It was everywhere at once, moving with impossible speed, its body distorting and shifting, as if it were made of smoke. Its mouth opened, a wide, cavernous black hole that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. "You cannot escape." The voice, a low, rumbling growl, seemed to come from everywhere. "You are already part of it. You were always meant to be here." I couldn't breathe. The words echoed through my mind like a death sentence. We were part of it? What did that mean? The shadows wrapped around my legs, cold and sharp, pulling me toward the center of the chamber where the figure now loomed, towering over us like some ancient god, its eyes black holes sucking the light from the world. Kevin shoved me forward, his face pale with terror. "We have to fight," he shouted, though I could hear the doubt in his voice. "There's no other choice, but how? How could we fight something that was so ancient, so all-encompassing? How could we defeat an enemy that wasn't even bound by the rules of reality?" In that moment of desperation, I felt something shift. Something deep inside me. A cold, bitter realization settled in my chest. "We can't fight it," I whispered. "We're not supposed to fight it. We're supposed to—" Before I could finish my thought, the walls around us seemed to collapse in on themselves, and the floor cracked open, sending waves of terror crashing through my body. The shadows surged forward like an overwhelming tide, pulling us into the way. "Blackness!" I screamed. But there was no sound. The tunnel was consuming us. And in that final, suffocating moment, as the darkness wrapped around me, I felt the chilling touch of the gate. It was like being drawn into the very heart of the abyss, into a place where time and space no longer mattered. It wasn't just the tunnel anymore. It wasn't just the shadows. The entire world was folding in on itself, and I was at its center. And then everything went black. When I came to, I wasn't sure where I was. Everything felt wrong. The air was thick, like I was breathing underwater, and the world around me seemed off. I couldn't explain it. The walls of the tunnel, which had been so familiar, now looked like they were made of something foreign. Something not quite stone, not quite anything I could place. They shimmered, as if they were alive, shifting under my gaze. I sat up, my head spinning, and for a moment I thought I might be dreaming. But the pain in my chest, the cold weight pressing down on my body, this was real. This was happening. I wasn't sure where the others were, but I knew one thing. We weren't alone. I stumbled to my feet, shaking off the dizziness, and looked around. The tunnel stretched in every direction, but nothing seemed to make sense anymore. The paths that once seemed familiar had disappeared, replaced by endless corridors that seemed to go on forever. Then, in the distance, I saw it. A light, flickering, like the glow of a dying flame. It beckoned me, pulling me toward it, just like the whispers had pulled us forward from the very beginning. Only now, the whispers were silent. They were gone, replaced by a strange, empty stillness. I moved toward the light, each step heavy with uncertainty. Was I still dreaming? Was this all just another layer of the nightmare? But no, this felt too real. The light seemed to pulse with a strange energy, almost like it was alive, and the closer I got, the more I felt it. A presence, something watching me from the other side of that light, something old, something powerful. When I reached it, I saw the object. It was a small, weathered box, just like the one we had found earlier, the one that had held the map. This time, however, the box was open, its contents scattered on the ground around it. I knelt down, my heart racing, and picked up the first thing I saw, a single crumpled piece of paper. It was a letter, faded and worn, the ink barely legible. But something about it seemed significant, like this was the key to everything. I unfurled it carefully, reading the words that had been scrawled in a hasty, almost frantic hand. The gate is not a doorway. It is a trap. To open it is to invite something that was never meant to be. You must close it, but not by force. It will only close if you understand what you have opened. Only then will the shadows retreat. Only then will you be free. I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine as I read the last words. The gate. A trap. It was true. The gate wasn't just a passage, it was an invitation. An invitation to something ancient, something powerful. And we had opened it. We had released it. But now there was hope. There was a way to close it, not by force, but by understanding. I looked around, hoping to find the others, to share this with them. But the tunnel was still silent. Empty. A vast, infinite void. The only sound was the pounding of my heart in my chest. And then I heard a voice. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was loud, clear, a voice I recognized. You found it. I whipped around, heart racing, to see James standing there, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He had the same look he had worn when he first spoke to us, that haunted, distant look of someone who had seen too much. What happened? Where are the others? I asked, my voice shaking. James didn't answer. He didn't need to. He just looked at me with those wide, dark eyes and nodded toward the letter in my hands. "You've found the truth," he said quietly. "The shadows were never the enemy. They were the guards. They were protecting something. They were meant to stop us from opening it." I frowned, confusion creeping into my mind. Stop us? From what? What is the gate, really? What is it trapping? James looked at me, his expression softening just a little, but the fear was still there, lurking in the corners of his eyes. It's not what you think. It's not some otherworldly thing, not a demon, not an alien force. It's time itself that we've been messing with. The words didn't make sense. Time, I repeated. What are you talking about? The gate, James explained, his voice hoarse. It's a rift in time. Not just a passage between places, but a fracture in the very fabric of reality. The military didn't just open a door to another world. They opened a door to our past, a place where time is no longer linear, where everything loops, everything repeats. My heart stopped. We've been in a cycle, James continued. All of us. From the very beginning. The tunnel, the shadows, the gate. It was never about a place. It was about a moment in time. A moment that keeps coming back, over and over. And once you open the gate, you can't leave. You can't break the cycle until you understand it. I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. This wasn't just about escaping the tunnel. This was about breaking the cycle. The shadows hadn't been trying to destroy us. They were trying to keep us trapped. They were trying to prevent us from doing what the military had done, tampering with time itself. And now, we had to find a way to fix it, to stop the loop. But how? How could we close a rift in time? As I looked down at the letter again, I saw something I had missed before. A small, faded symbol in the corner. It looked like a seal, an ancient seal, and beneath it, written in tiny letters, was another line. The key is not in force, but in remembering. The past can be rewritten, but only by understanding its cost. And just like that, I understood. The weight of the letter pressed heavily in my hand, its cryptic words filling my mind with a terrible sense of understanding. The realization hit me like a jolt of electricity. The tunnel, the gate, the shadows, they weren't just a random anomaly. They were a cycle, a loop of time, repeating itself, drawing us in over and over, each time with the same inevitable outcome. The past can be rewritten, but only by understanding its cost. Those words haunted me. How could we change something so vast, so all-encompassing? If the military had been trapped in this same loop, if they had somehow opened this door to the past without realizing it, how had they tried to close it? How had they even begun to understand what was happening? I turned to James, whose face remained expressionless, but whose eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and something darker, something like regret. You knew this, didn't you? I asked softly. You've been here before, haven't you? His eyes flickered, but he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down at the floor, his fingers trembling slightly as they traced the edge of the letter in my hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained, as if dredging up memories he hadn't wanted to relive. I told you that we were never meant to come here, he said quietly. But I didn't explain why, because when I went in, the first time, I saw it. The cycle. It was all a loop. It's like every time someone opens the gate, they become part of the cycle, part of the history. And once you're in, there's no way out unless you break it. I shook my head, my mind struggling to process what he was saying. But how? How do we break it? How do we stop it from happening again? James paused, his face haunted by memories that must have felt too terrible to speak. But he kept going. The military, when they came down here, they thought they were experimenting with something they didn't understand. They opened the gate, thinking they could harness whatever power was on the other side. But what they didn't realize was that the gate wasn't just a door. It was a trap. A trap that bends time, that pulls people in over and over, repeating the same mistakes. Each time someone enters, it restarts. They've been doing this for decades, stuck in this endless loop. And we're part of it now. I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine as the implications of his words began to settle in. We weren't just dealing with a supernatural force or an ancient curse. We were trapped in something much worse, a time loop, a cycle of events that repeated themselves over and over, each time bringing someone else into its grasp. "But we're not the first," James continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "The 13 men who came before us, they've been here before. They've all been trapped in this same cycle, repeating the same steps, never breaking free. And now the question is, will we be the ones to break it, or will we become part of the cycle, forever locked in this place?" I felt the gravity of his words, the weight of history pressing down on me. The past was repeating itself. The military had come, opened the gate, and now we were here. The same forces had drawn us in, the same fate awaiting us. But the letter, the final clue, had given me hope. If the past could be rewritten, if understanding the cost was the key, then maybe we had a chance. But what did it cost? And how could we even begin to understand? I turned to Kevin, Mark, and the others, who had been standing silently in the background, absorbing everything we were learning. Their faces were pale, drawn tight with fear, but there was something else in their eyes now, a flicker of determination. "We can't just keep running," Kevin said, his voice firm despite the terror that had gripped us all. "We've learned enough now. The cycle repeats because no one understands it. If we're going to end this, we have to understand what happened. We have to go back to the beginning." The beginning. The words echoed in my mind. "Back to the beginning," I repeated. "What do you mean?" "We can't go back, Kevin. We're already stuck here." But Kevin shook his head. What I mean is, we need to understand what happened to the men who came before us. We need to find out what they did, what they failed to do, that kept them trapped in the loop. We can't change anything unless we know the exact moment we went wrong." I didn't fully understand what he was suggesting, but I knew he was right. If we were ever going to break the cycle, we needed to retrace our steps, dig deeper into the past. We needed to find the moment, the key, that would change everything. James, his face grim, nodded slowly. "I'll take you to the place where it started," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "The place where the military first opened the gate. If we can understand what happened there, maybe we can stop it from repeating." We all looked at one another, fear and uncertainty hanging in the air. But there was something else now, something stronger than fear. It was the faintest glimmer of hope. The thought that maybe, just maybe, we could stop this. Maybe we could end the loop that had trapped us all. Without a word, we turned and began walking. Not forward into the tunnel's unknown darkness, but back to the place where it all began. As we moved deeper into the bowels of the tunnel, the air grew colder, the weight of history pressing in around us. But with every step, I felt the tension of the cycle, winding tighter, like the last few turns of a clock before time runs out. We were moving toward the end, toward the moment when history would either repeat itself or finally be rewritten. The deeper we ventured into the tunnel, the more oppressive the air became. It was as if we were descending into the heart of the beast itself, each step taking us closer to something ancient, something unspeakable. The walls seemed to pulse as though they were alive, breathing in time with our every movement. The very ground beneath our feet felt unstable, shifting like the earth was about to swallow us whole. And still, we pressed on, guided by the only hope we had left: understanding. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, one I'd never seen before. This place, dark and suffused with an eerie glow, felt like the epicenter of everything. The floor was uneven, cracked, as though it had been scarred by something far beyond human comprehension. And in the center, surrounded by jagged rocks and strange symbols etched into the stone, stood the object of our nightmares. The gate. It wasn't like the doorways we had passed through. It wasn't made of wood or metal or anything that felt solid. It was a swirling vortex of darkness and light, a tear in reality itself, stretching and writhing like the gaping mouth of a monster. Energy crackled through the air, visible only in the form of shifting waves of energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The gate pulsed with an unsettling rhythm, like the heartbeat of something that had been slumbering for eons, now waking. I could feel it. It was calling to us. James, Mark, Kevin, and the others were standing just behind me, their eyes wide, filled with a mixture of fear and disbelief. This was it. The place where it all began, the heart of the cycle. The moment we had to understand. James stepped forward, his voice hoarse, reverberating through the cold silence. "This is where it happened. This is where the military tried to open it. And this is where they failed." I couldn't look away from the gate. Something about it was so wrong, so unnatural, that it hurt to even focus on it for too long. It felt like it was pulling at the edges of my mind, tempting me to step forward, to cross over into the unknown. But I knew better. I had to resist. I looked at James, my voice shaky but determined. "So, what happened? How did they fail?" James's expression grew even darker, his gaze shifting to the ground as he recalled the horrible truth. "They thought they could control it. They thought the power on the other side was something they could harness. But what they didn't understand was that the gate wasn't a tool. It was a doorway to everything. The past, the future, and every moment in between. But it was also a prison." "A prison?" Kevin asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Yes," James replied. "A prison meant to hold whatever was on the other side. The military didn't realize that they weren't just opening a door to another place. They were unlocking a door to time itself, a fracture, a rift between moments, and once it was opened, the cycle began." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. The pieces were falling into place. The gate wasn't just a doorway to some unknown force. It was a rift in time, pulling people in and trapping them within its endless loops. The military's meddling had started it. But it was our decision to come here that had sealed our fate. "The first time they opened it," James continued, his voice tight, "there was no going back. Time started to bend. The men who were sent in before us, they were caught in the cycle, trapped. It wasn't just their bodies that were taken. It was their memories, their moments. They became part of the loop. And every time someone opened the gate after that, the cycle restarted. Over and over, bringing more and more people into the rift." "So Mark trailed off, his voice barely audible. "We're already part of the cycle." James nodded solemnly. "Yes, the military opened the gate. But each time it was reopened, it grew stronger. The more people who entered, the more it pulled at the fabric of reality itself. And now the only way to stop it is to understand what happened here, the moment when it all started." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. This was it. The moment where we either broke the cycle or we became part of it forever. I stepped forward, my breath shallow. The gate was pulling me in, its pull so strong that it was hard to think straight. But I knew I had to stay focused. The letter had said that the past could be rewritten. It wasn't about fighting or destroying the gate. It was about understanding it, and then closing it. But how? The answer came to me in a flash. I remembered something from the documents we'd found earlier, something about the ritual. The military had used ancient symbols, rituals tied to the very essence of time itself. What if those symbols weren't just warnings, but keys? What if understanding the ritual wasn't just about stopping the cycle, it was about resetting it? I turned back to James. "We need to do the ritual," I said, my voice trembling with urgency. We need to perform the ritual, but the right way. The way they failed to do it. James's face paled, but he nodded. It's the only way. But we have to be careful. The gate won't let us do it without a cost. What do you mean? Kevin asked, fear creeping into his voice. James's eyes locked with mine. It's a sacrifice. The gate only closes when it has taken enough. It will demand one of us. The realization hit me like a physical blow. One of us would have to stay behind. One of us would have to make the ultimate sacrifice to close the gate. My heart raced, my mind spinning. I couldn't let anyone volunteer for this. But deep down, I knew. It had to be done. We couldn't escape this nightmare unless we made that final choice. The room seemed to darken, the gate flickering like a flame about to die. The shadows writhed around us as though they could sense the decision we were about to make. And then, the voice, louder now, closer, whispered through the air. You can't stop it. You are already mine. It was the final warning. But we had no choice. We had to try. As we began the ritual, I knew that the only way to break the cycle was to face the darkness head-on, to understand that the past could never be changed without first accepting the cost of it. And as the darkness closed in, I made my peace with that truth. The air crackled with an overwhelming tension, a sharpness that cut through the very core of my being. The gate pulsed in front of us, its swirling darkness still beckoning like the abyss, waiting to devour whatever we threw at it. The ritual we had begun to perform felt like it was slowing time itself, making every second stretch into eternity. We chanted, our voices barely audible, as we attempted to replicate the symbols and incantations the military had used. But with each word we uttered, the darkness around us only seemed to grow thicker, heavier. I had always imagined that the end of this nightmare would come with a great battle, a confrontation with something otherworldly. But what we were facing now, what we were walking into, wasn't a battle at all. It was a reckoning. The air around us vibrated as if the very fabric of existence was being torn apart by our actions. As we repeated the ritual, something changed. The shadows seemed to grow more active, almost alive. They moved in strange, unnatural ways, wrapping around us like tendrils, choking the light out of the tunnel. I could feel the weight of the past pressing down on us, its grip tightening with every breath we took. The whispers, the same ones that had plagued us since the moment we entered the tunnel, grew louder, more insistent. And then, just as we reached the final step of the ritual, the unexpected happened. The gate flared, a burst of light so bright that it blinded me, and for a moment I thought we had failed, that we had unleashed something far worse than we could have imagined. But as the light faded, something had shifted. The shadows began to retreat, pulling back into the rift, as though the gate itself had recoiled from the force of our actions. It wasn't over. Not yet. I looked around at the others, their faces pale with fear, their bodies trembling. Mark, Kevin, and James were all standing motionless, as if waiting for the world to collapse around us. But instead, the tunnel was growing still. Too still. The oppressive weight that had pressed down on us for so long was lifting, replaced by a strange, unsettling calm. The silence was deafening. And then it happened. The air in the tunnel shifted, and with it, a cold realization sank deep into my chest. The gate, the rift in time, had closed. But not in the way we expected. It wasn't a permanent solution. It was a temporary reprieve. I stumbled back, my heart racing. What had we done? The gate hadn't just been closed. It had been sealed, but with a new twist. The past wasn't gone. It was now trapped in a single moment, a frozen moment in time. The cycle wasn't broken. It had been paused. And then I saw it. The figure, the shadowy entity that had chased us from the very beginning, had appeared again, but this time it wasn't the same. It stood at the edge of the chamber, its tall, gaunt form casting an eerie silhouette against the now still gate. Its face, which had once been a faceless void, was now clear. There was something more to it, something familiar. It was me, or rather, it was a version of me. The figure smiled, or at least, the semblance of a smile stretched across its face. But there was no joy in it, only the hollow emptiness of a reality that had been fractured, split in two. "Welcome back," it whispered. "Did you think you could escape what was already written?" I felt my stomach churn. The reality around us seemed to distort, bending like a reflection in shattered glass. The tunnel, the shadows, the gate, they were all alive. They weren't just manifestations of some ancient curse. They were the result of a broken timeline. And we had been the ones to break it, not by choice, but by accident. The loop wasn't just repeating. It was rewriting itself. "You're part of this now," the figure said, its voice smooth and cold, like it had all the time in the world. "Every step you took, every choice you made, they've been written. And now you'll never leave. You'll never escape the cycle. Not unless you understand what you've done." I felt the words sink in, heavy and suffocating. We hadn't just tried to stop the loop. We had reinforced it. The twist was unbearable. We hadn't just opened the gate. We had created it. We had become part of it. And now every time the cycle reset, it would involve us. We would relive this moment over and over, trapped in the rift between times. Forever. I turned to James, whose face was now ashen, filled with the realization that this was beyond anything he had ever expected. Is this it?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Is this our fate? Are we going to live this nightmare again and again?" James didn't answer. He only stared at the figure. The version of me that wasn't quite me. It spoke again, its words like ice. "This is your true destiny. You will never escape. This is where the story begins, and where it will always end." And just as I thought the last of the light was fading, I realized the terrible truth. We weren't meant to close the gate. We were meant to feed it. And now that we had done so, the cycle would begin again, bringing new people into the trap we had unwittingly set. We had rewritten the past, but in doing so, we had only ensured its eternal repetition. The shadows, those endless, twisting forms, began to move again, this time with purpose, as though they had finally been freed from their own cycle. The rift, the gate, was still pulsing with that eerie, almost hypnotic rhythm, and the distorted version of me standing at its center was a silent reminder of everything we had lost. We had tried to close it. We had tried to understand it. But now, we realized the truth. We weren't meant to control the gate. We were part of its design, destined to relive the same horror over and over. The figure, myself, stepped forward, its movements unnervingly fluid, like it was made of shadows and smoke. It reached out its hand, and I couldn't help but feel the chill as it touched my own arm, the air growing colder around me. "Do you understand now?" the figure whispered, its voice cold and unyielding. "Do you understand what you've done? What you will continue to do?" I tried to pull away, but my body felt paralyzed, trapped in the moment. The realization weighed on me. Everything we had experienced, everything we had fought for, had been in vain. The cycle was endless. We had sealed our fate the moment we stepped into the tunnel, and now we were forever part of it. "This is where it all began," the figure continued, its voice echoing in the hollow chamber. "And this is where it will end. For all of you. But it doesn't have to be over. Not yet. Not for you." I felt the darkness closing in on us, a suffocating pressure. The whispering shadows pressed tighter, wrapping around my body, my thoughts. The gate flickered, growing more unstable with each passing second. I could feel time bending, twisting. A sudden flash of clarity hit me. The only way out wasn't through force, or logic, or trying to close the gate. It was through acceptance. The rift, the gate, the endless cycle, they existed because of our resistance, because we refused to accept our place in it. And I realized with a terrible clarity that the only way to break free was to let go. But how could I accept such a fate? How could I give in? The answer, of course, was simple. The sacrifice wasn't just in closing the gate. It was in understanding it, embracing it. And that meant acknowledging that there was no escape, no way to outrun the cycle that had been set in motion long before we arrived. The shadows were swirling around us now, as if they were feeding off our fear, our confusion. They weren't hostile. No, they were the manifestation of time itself, the endless repeating loop that we had unleashed. They were both our prison and our guide. And then, just as I felt myself starting to lose my grip on reality, the figure in front of me spoke again, its voice cold but strangely comforting. Maybe you can't escape this, maybe none of us can, but your understanding of it, your awareness, that's what makes you different. That's what makes you special. You are the key, not to the gate, but to your own destiny. If you understand the past, you can rewrite your future. The figure's hand dropped, and it faded into the shadows, leaving only the echo of its words behind. The gate itself seemed to ripple, as if it too was shifting. The cycle, however, wasn't over. Not yet. The darkness that had surrounded us began to dissipate, leaving behind only silence. The tunnel, which had once seemed alive with whispers, was now eerily still, as if it, too, had come to an end. I turned to face the others, but I already knew. They would remember. They would always remember. But we were all trapped, forever bound by the choices we made, forever bound to the cycle. It was over. Or was it just beginning again? Maybe this wasn't about understanding what happened. Maybe it was about understanding that there was never any true resolution. Maybe, just maybe, this was the true horror of the gate, the acceptance that the cycle would never truly end. Could this really happen? I whispered aloud, looking around at my companions. Could any of us truly escape this? What happens now? But the silence was the only answer. The tunnel, the gate, the shadows, all of it remained. We were left standing at the edge of time, facing the endless void of the unknown. And as the camera slowly panned back, pulling away from us and the gate, I felt the creeping sensation that maybe, just maybe, there was no escaping this nightmare. The truth was, we were part of it. Thank you for watching. Leave your thoughts below. Could you live with the consequences of entering a place like this? Would you make the same choices we did? The story will never truly be over. This is where the story ends, but the mystery continues. If you'd like to delve deeper into more chilling tales, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. Stay safe. Or maybe don't.